All right, ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Today we're heading down to South America.
Oh, South America, always a fascinating place to talk about.
It is, and there's a lot going on down there. We're going to be focusing on Venezuela and specifically the opposition to Hugo Chavez's Bolivarian revolution
Right.
and how that kind of played out over time. And we'll talk about what happened after he passed away as well. And we're using a Wikipedia article as our jumping off point for this topic.
It's a topic that's often, I think, I find often misunderstood because there's this tendency to think of like a monolithic opposition to Chavez, and as we'll see, that's really not the case at all. And the evolution of this opposition is really key to understanding Venezuelan politics, both then and now.
Yeah, it wasn't just like, one group versus Chavez. It was way more complicated than that.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that we're going to try to really pull out in this deep dive is like who are the players? Like how did it evolve over time? What were the major events? But also try to understand the why behind it all. What were the motivations of these different groups?
Yeah, and to really understand that, I think it's important to rewind a bit, go back before Chavez even rose to prominence.
Yeah.
Picture Venezuela in the 1980s, an economic crisis gripping the nation, people losing faith in these traditional political parties that have been around forever.
Right.
So you have this fertile ground for change.
Yeah.
Something different.
Yeah, and that's what's so interesting is that change came in the form of Hugo Chavez, but not in the way that people expected. I mean, he launches this coup in 1992. It fails. But here's the thing. That failure, in a way, made him a symbol of the people's frustration.
Absolutely. And he was very savvy, I think, in recognizing that and realizing that, okay, maybe the traditional path of just protest and military might, that's not the only way forward. So he starts to understand the power of the ballot box, the power of actual political maneuvering. And it's a dual approach that would really define his career.
And lead him to victory in 1999.
Indeed.
So he comes to victory, and one of the first things he does as president, he establishes this constituent assembly to write a new constitution. Now, for people who aren't as familiar with how this all works, how is a constituent assembly different from like the existing Congress, and why was that significant?
So a constituent assembly has the power to basically rewrite the rules of the game.
Hmm.
So by creating one, Chavez effectively sidelines that existing Congress. And what's interesting here is that at that time, the opposition actually held a majority in that Congress.
Wow.
But by creating this new body, Chavez outmaneuvered them. He created a whole new playing field where he could essentially dictate the terms.
It's such a, we're talking about political maneuvering, and it just seems like such a savvy, well, I don't know if savvy is the right word, but just such a power move, right? To just completely sidestep, the existing political processes, consolidate his power through this assembly. It just feels like this is like a real turning point, not just for Chavez, but also for the opposition. Like they're gonna have to, from this point on, constantly be adapting their strategies.
Absolutely. It really forced them to recognize the scale of the challenge that they were facing. They weren't dealing with politics as usual anymore.
Right.
They were dealing with Chavez, who played the game very, very differently. And this is where we start to see, I think, those first signs of dissent, even within, even among some of his own allies, those who might have supported him early on.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to get into that. So it's the year 2000. Chavez calls for these mega elections. Can you talk about what were those and why did he feel so confident, even with the economy, still struggling at this time? Why call these elections?
So mega elections are fascinating because they essentially put every single elected position up for grabs at the same time.
Wow.
From the presidency all the way down to, local officials. It was a bold move meant to solidify his control, to really showcase the extent of his power. And while his popularity was still quite high, there were these cracks starting to emerge.
Cracks, you mean like even former allies now, like starting to oppose him?
Exactly. We're talking people like Francisco Arias Cardenas, figures who had been with him since that 92 coup, even ran against him in these mega elections.
Oh, wow.
So this is a sign that it's not just about, disagreeing on policies. There's a deeper unease there with the direction Chavez is taking the country.
Right, and so it's not even just about the political players at this point. It's like segments of Venezuelan society. Like, are they starting to kind of like get a little nervous about what's happening?
You start to see more vocal opposition from different groups, business leaders, unions, even the Catholic Church. They're starting to voice concerns.
Okay, so then it's 2002, and this is where things really start to heat up, right? You have Decree 1011, Chavez's attempt to reform education, and that triggers massive protests. What was it about this particular decree that ignited such a visceral reaction from the people?
Well, I think for many, it was seen as this real attempt to control the education system and really like the minds of future generations, you know?
Hmm.
It's about ideology.
Yeah.
It's about control. And remember, this is a period of intense polarization. So Chavez's opponents, they see this as another step towards authoritarianism.
Oh, right, right. So any move like this is going to be seen through that lens, and then it's followed up by the 49 laws, right?
Yeah.
Which is giving Chavez even more control over the economy, land ownership. I mean, this really, I imagine, further fueled those anxieties.
Hugely controversial, these laws. Supporters would say they were about, redistributing wealth, empowering the poor. But
Mhm.
for opponents, this was a direct attack on private property, on free enterprise. And it was seen as a way to further consolidate power in the executive branch.
So you have this real battle, playing out, right?
And this isn't just some, abstract political debate. This is about the soul of Venezuela, and it's playing out on the streets in the halls of power.
And it all kind of comes to a head in April 11th, 2002.
A day that lives in infamy for many Venezuelans.
Yeah, protests engulf the country, and it culminates in this short-lived coup d'etat that actually, I mean, removes Chavez from power briefly.
Briefly, but yeah.
Briefly, but still, that's a big deal. Talk about a tumultuous period. What can you tell us about what happened, and also the role of the media? Because I know that was a big point of contention during this time.
Oh, absolutely. The media landscape itself was incredibly divided. You had outlets openly supporting the coup, others remaining loyal to Chavez. So it was very difficult to get a clear picture of what was happening in real time. And this media polarization just further deepened the divisions that already existed within Venezuelan society.
Yeah.
I mean, how much influence did they have? It's hard to say definitively, but they certainly played a role in shaping public perception during those very uncertain days.
Yeah, because it's one thing if it's, a political party, you kind of know what you're getting into, right? But when you have like media outlets that people, rely on for information, for some semblance of truth, and you have such a divided media landscape, it does make it very, very difficult to even know like what to believe.
Absolutely, and I think it speaks to the power of information,
Right.
right? And how it can be used and unfortunately sometimes misused.
Absolutely. So the coup fails. Chavez is back in power. What now? How does the opposition, I mean, how do you even begin to regroup after something like this?
It's a real dilemma. How do you oppose a leader who's survived a coup attempt and who seems to have this unwavering support from a significant portion of the population? There were a lot of internal divisions within the opposition about the best way forward. Some advocated for continued protests, keep the pressure on. Others wanted to engage in the political process and maybe try to beat him at his own game.
Right.
Ultimately, they ended up doing a bit of both.
Okay, so walk us through that. So what were some of the next steps in this kind of push and pull, with Chavez?
Well, one of the significant moments is this recall referendum in 2004.
Hmm.
It's a big deal because it was a peaceful, constitutional means of potentially removing Chavez from power.
Right, right.
The opposition really put all their effort into this, gathering signatures, campaigning for his removal.
Yeah.
But in the end, Chavez survives the referendum. However, there were all these allegations of fraud, irregularities, which, really cast a shadow over the whole thing.
Correct.
And it really deepened the opposition's distrust in the electoral system. So, they're in this bind.
Right, like can we even trust this process?
Exactly, and that's a tough place to be.
It really is. So it seems like, through this period, they're constantly reacting, trying to anticipate Chavez's next move while dealing with these internal divisions. Did they ever find like solid footing? Like were they ever able to get ahead of it?
It was a period of immense difficulty for the opposition. They tried different things, strikes, boycotts, legal challenges. They were really trying to find that winning formula, something that could effectively counter Chavez's political maneuvering and really resonate with a broader segment of the population.
It's like they're kind of, always one step behind trying to catch up. So what happens next? Like what are some of the other tactics that they employ in this period, leading up to Chavez's passing?
So between 2005 and 2009, there's a lot of kind of testing the waters, trying different approaches. Like they actually boycott the 2005 parliamentary elections,
Hmm.
hoping to delegitimize the process. But that kind of backfires because it allows Chavez to really consolidate his control over the National Assembly.
Right, because if you're not playing the game, you can't win.
Right,
Right.
exactly. And there's this growing realization within the opposition that their division is really playing into Chavez's hands.
Right.
So there are these renewed attempts to unify the various factions, to recognize that they have better chance if they're working together.
Right. So was there a turning point there? Like, we've seen them kind of in this reactive mode for quite a while. Was there a moment where it felt like, okay, they finally found like more solid ground?
Yeah, I think 2009 is really significant. This is when they formally unite under the Mesa de la Unidad Democrática, or AMUD for short. And you can think of this as a big tent coalition bringing together all these different political parties, civil society groups, all under one banner.
And that must have taken some doing, right? I mean, given how fractious the opposition had been up to this point.
Absolutely, it was not easy.
Hmm.
But it really represented a recognition that to effectively challenge Chavez, they needed to present this united front.
Right.
It was a pragmatic move, born out of necessity.
Okay, so they finally get their act together, so to speak. Does it translate into like concrete gains for the opposition?
It's a bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah.
They make some gains in the 2010 parliamentary elections.
Mhm.
They could get a larger share of the vote, secure more seats in the National Assembly. So it
Yeah.
showed that unity could yield some results.
Yeah.
However, Chavez's party still retains control of the legislature.
Okay, so a step forward, but not a complete victory by any means. And then, of course, you have the 2012 presidential election, the last one that Chavez contests.
Yeah, an election that he wins, but, and this is important, it wasn't as decisive as his previous victories.
Hmm?
The opposition had mobilized a significant portion of the electorate, and it showed, that they were a force to be reckoned with.
Right, right. Okay, so then Chavez dies in 2013. Nicolás Maduro assumes the presidency. What becomes of the opposition in this post-Chavez era?
Well, they're still grappling with many of the same challenges.
Hmm.
A government they see as increasingly authoritarian, concerns about electoral integrity,
Right.
and of course that ongoing struggle to maintain unity within this very diverse coalition. But despite all of that, they've shown a remarkable ability to adapt.
Okay.
We see them participating in elections, engaging in dialogue with the government when possible, and mobilizing international pressure,
Hmm.
all with the goal of, trying to bring about a more democratic Venezuela.
So as we kind of come to the end of our deep dive here, what would you say is like the key takeaway for our listeners? What's the one thing you want them to remember about this whole story?
I think it's about resilience. The story of the opposition in Venezuela is one of resilience, adaptation.
Yeah.
It's about this enduring pursuit of democratic ideals, even in the face of, extraordinary challenges. And I think it reminds us that political landscapes are rarely static, that they're shaped by this constant push and pull, by those who dare to dissent, those who dare to stand up and say, we want something
It's a
different.
story that's still being written, right? So for anybody who's out there who's interested in learning more about Venezuela, contemporary Venezuela, you have to understand this history. You have to understand, this dance between Chavez's political maneuvering and the opposition's evolution.
It provides the essential context, really,
Yeah.
for making sense of the complexities of the present,
Right.
and even the uncertainties of what the future holds.
Absolutely. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. How might the opposition's strategies continue to evolve in the years to come? What factors, internal, external, might shape that trajectory? It's something to think about as we continue to watch this story unfold.